All right, so thank you so much for joining us for our Back to School live series. My name is Austin and my pronouns are he, him, and I'm a public health nurse at Niagara Region Public Health. Today I'm joined by Celeste Turner, who will be chatting with us about pronouns. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, you can put them in the chat at any time and we'll share them with Celeste at the end of the presentation. All right.
Can you go to the next slide?
Yes, yeah, it's all.
Do I get started then? You want me to get started, Austin?
Yes, sorry, yes.
No, that's okay. Awesome. Well, thank you folks so much for having me again, Niagara Parents. It's an honor. So yeah, today we're going to talk about pronouns. And if you're already like, what is that? That's okay. So we'll get to it in a second. But why exactly are we talking about pronouns? So pronouns are the words that we use when we don't use someone's name. And so I use they, them pronouns. Austin told us, or I can see in Austin's thing that he uses he, him pronouns. And so why is this important to talk about? It's important to talk about because everyone has the right to be seen and acknowledged the way that they need to be seen and acknowledged. So really to make sure that we're addressing people appropriately. It's also important to talk about because we want to avoid misgendering folks, which really is using the wrong pronouns for someone. This can be really upsetting and really, if you think about something that, you know, as a one-off, being misgendered might not be a big deal, but this is something that can happen constantly or over and over and over again for some folks, and that can really take a toll on folks in general, especially when I think about youth and especially when I think about mental health. So very important to avoid that. And from a Niagara Parents perspective, have you ever talked to your kid about pronouns, about what pronouns maybe do they use, what pronouns are their friends using, do they have classmates, and just really confirming even what their pronouns are, and knowing how to refer to their friends and classmates appropriately when needed. And kind of like I kind of said in the beginning, this may be new. You might already be like, I'm lost. I don't know what you're talking about. And that's totally okay. So we're going to dive into more of that. So pronouns, this is our friend the gender elephant, which we talked about a few weeks ago. If you've missed that, I think you can go back on the Niagara Parents page and watch that video as well if you want to jump back and see the whole gender elephant diagram. But pronouns, I like to refer to them as personal pronouns because they're what someone uses personally. You may have heard this referred to as like preferred pronouns, and I'm trying to shift my language in a way that it's not really a preference, right? To me, that's like saying, you know, I would prefer if my dentist would wear gloves when I go for my dental visit. I'm like, ew, no, it's a very small ask of my dentist to wear gloves, right? And that's really what pronouns are. And if that didn't happen, I'd be very uncomfortable, which similar with pronouns is that if we're not using the right pronouns, it can make someone very uncomfortable. So I'm trying to shift the language for myself personally and even out in the community that it's not a preference, it's just a small ask, right? And so calling them personal pronouns instead. So pronouns, like I said in the beginning, it's what we use if we don't use someone's name. Pronoun, literally defined, is a word that substitutes for a noun. And a noun we know is a person, a place, or a thing. So person includes names. So a word that substitutes a noun, what word do I use if I don't use your name. It's very simple. It's not nearly as complicated as it might seem. So here are a bunch of pronouns. Here are examples of pronouns. And if you're like, oh my goodness, that's way more pronouns than I ever thought existed, that's okay. And we're going to talk about how you know what pronouns to use. So don't worry about that. If you're already feeling like, well, how do I know if like somebody looks a certain way, or if they use these pronouns, or what's going on? That's not your job. You don't have to be able to figure out someone's pronouns. I'm going to tell you how to know someone's pronouns, and you'll be a pro at pronouns. So here's an example of a bunch of them. Along the top, we have ones that fit society's gender binary, she, her, and hers, he, him, and his. And then we have gender neutral pronouns. So we have they, them, and theirs with the asterisk, which is that they're used in a singular way, which I'll talk more about in a moment. And then there are more pronouns. These are often referred to as neo-pronouns. And again, don't panic if you're like, what do you mean there's more? How do I know how to use them? That's okay. We're going to talk about all of that. But before I do, I have a little story to share. So yesterday, I found a wallet on the ground at Walmart. I took it to a cashier, and together we tracked down the owner. They were so happy that I returned their wallet that they tried to offering me cash. Of course, I refused because it's not their fault that they lost their wallet. I was just glad to help return it to them. Anyways, moral of the story is you do understand using they, them pronouns when referring to a singular person. So we're actually really good at this. We do this all the time. Is use they, them pronouns in a singular way. So isn't it plural? Absolutely, they, them is plural, but also no, it's also singular. And it's been found to be used as singular in the English language over thousands of years. I've given this presentation. We did the math a couple of weeks ago. I've presented to 1,000 people in the year of 2021 so far today. And twice I've had someone say, Celeste, I'm an English teacher. That doesn't make sense. I don't understand. And then I say this, well, it's actually been used in a singular way in the English language over thousands of years. And both English teachers were like, yeah, like in this book, or yeah, like in this example. Like, yeah, you're the English teacher. You would know better than I would. But on the note of English teachers, it's definitely not been taught in any traditional sense of education, unless you're like a really woke English teacher right now teaching, I don't know, grade 3 English. It's not happening. Folks aren't being taught about using they, them in a singular way. And so that's why I think it can be a bit of a challenge or a bit of a learning curve for some folks. That's not a bad thing. It just kind of is what it is. And all we can do is learn and grow and practice. And so another thing to note is that often they, them pronouns are used by folks who have a gender identity that's outside of the gender binary. And again, if you don't know what I'm talking about, then flip back and watch the video from a couple of weeks ago with the gender elephant. But it doesn't have to be that way. There's no rules about pronouns, and it can get really sticky when we talk about pronouns and talking about misgendering and gender in relation to pronouns, is that there's actually not even any rules about what genders can use what pronouns. There aren't any rules. We're not talking about genders using pronouns, we're talking about people using pronouns, and that's what's important to remember. So in this example here, you know, we have a lot of folks who are non-binary, genderqueer, agender tend to use they, them pronouns, but we can't make that assumption about folks based on their gender identity. And even someone can have a gender identity that fits society's gender binary, and they can use they, them pronouns if they want to. If that's how they feel affirmed, if that's how they want to be addressed, if that's what makes them happy, great. Why don't we do that for them? So how do you use they, them pronouns? The same way you always have, which is that example I gave you 2 slides ago. Our brains are really, really good at this when we don't know what pronouns to use for someone. So if I gave you an example and said, oh my gosh, my lawyer just called with the most amazing news, you would say, wow, what did they say? Because I didn't tell you my lawyer's pronouns in the sentence that I gave you. And that's not something that we generally assume someone's pronouns through, right? And so our brains subconsciously, very quickly are like, she, no, he, no, they, and puts it in like a split second. We're really, really good at that. Where the challenge comes in is when you have to consciously do it, when you have to, like, you know, it's they, them pronouns, and you know you need your brain to do that. And it's not that it's bad or wrong. A lot of us aren't used to it, and that's okay. And I know personally, and from many other folks that I know personally, and also who I work with, who use they, them pronouns, that it's much more meaningful to have someone fumble and be like, she, sorry, they, he, they, but like make a mess of yourself. That's so much more impactful, and that means so much more than just being like, that's too hard, I'm just going to call you this. That's too hard, I just can't do it. That's too hard, it's not the English language. It is, it has been for thousands of years. So don't be afraid to get messy with it, is what I'm trying to say. It really just comes down to practice. And I always say practice makes not perfect, but progress. So important to practice that, and to have examples. You know, if someone in your life is using they, them pronouns, then you can practice that and practice using their pronouns with people. If you have, you know, a friend in your life who's like, hey folks, I want to use they, them pronouns now. You can practice with your friends talking and using they, them pronouns, and it will help it be more natural for your brain and your mouth to function that way and to be able to speak that way. So another little grammar lesson here, although that in this way, when we're talking about they, them pronouns in a singular sense, that it's referring to an individual, the verbs are conjugated the same way as if it was a plural. So you wouldn't say they is, you would say they are. So for example, if you're like, I just watched this really great video from Niagara Parents with Celeste, you would say they're so great, and not they is great, like they are great. I'm just being silly and giving myself a compliment. But yeah, so the words that come before, after, around the they, them pronouns is the same as a singular as it is with a plural. And like I said already, you use them the same way as if you didn't know someone's gender. And again, like I said, we can't assume someone's pronouns based on their gender, but we've been brought up in a society that teaches us to do that, right? And so we're like, oh, this is your gender, this is what you look like, so these must be your pronouns. So you use they, them pronouns in the same way that we shouldn't be doing that anyways, but the same way that your brain would fail that math to try to do that gender pronoun math for someone that you see. Use them the same way as if you just didn't know. And the reality is you don't know. You never know unless, I'll tell you in a second. Oh, here we are. Yeah. You don't know unless you ask. It's the only way you can actually know what someone's pronouns are. And some folks get really worried about this. They're like, what do you mean I have to ask people their pronouns? Aren't they going to be offended? Aren't people going to be upset? I've asked probably thousands of people their pronouns by now. I personally have never had a bad experience. I've had really great experiences. I've had youth multiple times now. I've had youth cry when I ask their pronouns because nobody's ever asked them their pronouns before. Nobody's asked them before. But I'm also not naive, so I'm not going to sit here and say that nobody's going to get mad at you or it's always going to go well. It could possibly go not well. But I think all you have to do in that scenario is explain yourself. If you ask someone, what are your pronouns? And if they're like, what do you mean? What? Just explain to them. I just wanted to make sure I was addressing you properly, and I ask everybody. Don't take it personally, right? And honestly, if it goes really terrible, throw me under the bus. I'm like, I watched a video with Celeste from the health center and they said it was a good idea and I'll never ask you again. That's fine. Like, I don't really think it's going to go that terrible. I think we were raised in a way to think that that's a bad thing. Like to, you know, I've heard where kids are like, is that a boy or a girl? And the parents are like, shh, no, don't say that. It's like, no, it's not kids are curious. It's fine. Anyways, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to ask people their pronouns. And here's some tips to make it more natural. Is to include your own pronouns as much as possible. Hey, I'm Celeste. I use they, them pronouns. What are your pronouns? And then it's like, well, you already gave me yours, so I guess I'll give you mine back, right? It just really not normalizes the exchange. And there are ways to include your pronouns beyond just in conversation. You can include your pronouns in screen names, in signatures, like email signatures, on name tags. You can wear buttons that have your pronouns on them. We made buttons at the health center that say, I want to know your pronouns, and they were super popular. We brought them to an event and lots of folks took those, which is fun. Yeah, just really including your pronouns as much as often can be really powerful. The other thing to consider too is you might be thinking like, well, my pronouns are this and it's obvious, and you know, I'm not gender diverse and nobody ever questions my pronouns, so why would I put them out there? And what's important about putting your pronouns out there is that says to people, hey, I know about pronouns and I want to know yours back. It's having your own I want to know your pronouns button like everywhere you go. So if you are thinking like, well, everyone knows my pronouns, I never get mispronounced, why does that matter? That is like a beacon to people that's like, tell me your pronouns. I want to know your pronouns, and how great of a message to send. So now you know someone's pronouns. What happens if you make a mistake or slip up? I recommend really don't make a big deal about it. If you start slipping into this like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, and it's just so hard, and I'm so stupid, or whatever, if you slip into this negative dialogue around it, it just creates a weird environment, and almost like where then that person has to say it's okay, and it's like a weird caretaking vibe. You just don't want to go there. So I usually just recommend don't make a big deal. Correct yourself though, say it and be like, oh, yep, I meant this, thanks. And just move on. The only exception would be if somebody is very affected by you using the wrong pronouns, like maybe it's the 1,000th time that day that someone's used the wrong pronoun for them, and you just did this one time, and that was the one straw that broke the camel's back. You might have to match your response to their response. So if someone is very upset about you using the wrong pronoun, you might have to elevate what you're saying to an extent too, right? And just really explain yourself. It wasn't intentional. Don't mean to be harmful. I'm still learning. I'm going to keep making an effort. Thank you for being patient with me. Whatever that is. But otherwise, I would say try not to make a big deal about it. Unless that person's very upset about it, then you might also have to dive into it more. If someone's very upset, don't just not make a big deal. Be like, oh, sorry, and move on if they're upset. Oh yes, here we go. If someone is very upset, your response should match theirs. So a couple more tips then about pronouns. And this is the biggest one. Don't make assumptions. That's our biggest downfall, is that our brains are logical. We like to make sense of things. We like to problem solve. But a lot of times this doesn't serve us when it comes to pronouns, that we can't make assumptions. You very well have assumed people's pronouns your whole life for a long time. And like most of the time, it's probably been fine. But some of the time, it's not fine, and that's enough of the time for it to not be fine, right? And so that's why it's important to not make assumptions and to have conversations and have opportunities to exchange pronouns to make sure that we're acknowledging and addressing each other appropriately. Neutralizing language as much as possible. So pronouns are one thing, but we very much are in a society that's cis heteronormative, meaning that everyone is cisgender and or heterosexual until proven otherwise. And so through our language, we can also make assumptions about gender without meaning to, right? If you ask someone, do you have a boyfriend or do you have a husband? Instead of just saying, do you have a partner or whatever, right? Like you might assume that person's orientation a certain way or their gender a certain way, just through the language that we use. I'm making this very simple. Like there are thousands of examples of ways that we can be neutralizing language, and just something to consider, like, is the way that I speak or the questions I'm asking, making assumptions in doing that. My partner and I often, like, if we say we're like driving and we see someone with a cute dog, because that happens all the time, we're like, dog, and like frantically pointing while we drive. So say we see someone with a dog, we won't be like, wow, look at his dog. We're always like, look at their dog, look at that person's dog. Like, even though that person's never going to know that we talked about them and their dog from a distance, we still won't put that assumption on them. Another piece is be careful about confidentiality, disclosure, and outing. So quote unquote outing. Something to be very, very mindful of is that if someone discloses to you, it could be their pronouns, it could be their gender identity, it could be their sexual and or romantic orientation. If someone discloses that to you, you need to be very clear about, and who else knows about this, and who else is it okay to know about this. So for example, if say your kid has a friend over and you're like, hey, I watched this video about pronouns today, let's talk about pronouns. And your child's friend says, I actually use he, him pronouns, or whatever, pronouns that you didn't realize they used. You should ask them, well, do your parents know that, like when your parent comes to pick you up, should I switch back to the other parent? Like you have to have these conversations and make sure that you're never disclosing that information beyond where that person is comfortable with it going, because things unfortunately could take a very negative turn if that information goes beyond where that person is not only comfortable but safe for it to go. So a very important conversation to have. If somebody discloses something to you that, you can say something like, I'm so glad you felt safe enough for telling me, or thank you for sharing that with me. But the next thing you talk about absolutely has to be, and who else knows, or who is it okay for to know that about you? And another point here, just be patient. Be patient with someone who might be exploring their name and pronouns. It can be a really big process for some folks. And that's totally okay. And I say this to parents often too. If you think about, when you knew that you were expecting a child, a lot of folks don't often just know what name right away that they want to name their child, right? And so for someone who's exploring and realizing that the name they were given at birth isn't appropriate for them, but now they're trying to find their own, that can be quite a process. For some folks it is, for some folks it isn't, and that's all valid and fine. And again, it really just circles back to the first point. It's just don't make assumptions. So even if you meet someone one day, they use this name and these pronouns, we can't assume that that's their name and pronouns forever. Not only because they might be exploring, but also some folks are fluid in that, and that's okay too. And that's all that I have to say about pronouns for now. I really could talk about this kind of stuff all day, so it's a little dangerous when you invite me to speak. But this is my role. This is my job at the Niagara Falls Community Health Center. I have this little flyer on the right. Again, I'm the LGBTQ2+ support coordinator. So if you bring up to your family tonight, you're like, hey, I watched this video about pronouns today, and the conversation maybe goes somewhere that you didn't expect it to go, and you're like, wow, I could use support about this. Let me know, reach out. I don't have a fancy referral process. However, if you want to get in touch with me, phone, texting, email is all fine. And on the screen here are some of the things that I do. And if you're not sure, if you're like, maybe Celeste can help with this thing, just ask, just let me know. And even if I can't, at minimum, I'll help you navigate finding the right person who can support you with whatever you're going. Yeah, back to you, Austin. I don't know.
Thank you so much, Celeste. So before you go, we do have a few questions for you.
Sure.
So if you don't mind. The first one is, how do I know what pronouns to use for someone whose pronouns change?
Yeah, so I think that flips back to, can I go backwards? Yeah. Is really this, I kind of just talked about that, but about just that we can't make assumptions. And so some folks, like I said, just for example, but again, we can't make these assumptions about anybody. But for example, sometimes folks who use the gender identity, gender fluid, might feel like their gender identity changes daily, weekly, often, whatever fits for them. And so we can't make those assumptions. Just because we know one day what their name and pronouns are doesn't mean it'll be that way forever. And so it really just comes back to that. I often have conversations with folks where, I meet, hey, I'm Celeste, my pronouns are they, them, what's your name and pronouns? And then as I'm writing it down, I'm like, if it changes, will you let me know? So I'm often doing that. I'm like, I want to know, and I'll check in with folks, if I haven't seen them in a bit, then I'll do that. We're in a youth group called Queer Youth Collective, and it's every other week. And so even though I just saw you 2 weeks ago, we check in again and we all go around and say, what's our name and what's our pronouns? Even though I know all your faces. And sometimes that changes for youth. And in that instance, it gives them an opportunity to try that on for an hour and see if it fits or doesn't. But yeah, I think it just comes down to not making assumptions. And if you know that somebody might fluctuate on that, and just checking in often if that still fits.
Perfect. And do you have any tips for helping remember someone's pronouns?
Yeah, so like I said, like having things, it's helpful if that person has their stuff in their screen name and their name tag, whatever, because then you see it often and you have a visual. If we're talking about youth, or in an instance where that's not necessarily accessible, like I've had youth who I've supported their families in getting that youth a button that has their pronouns, and they wear that button. And so every time you see them, it's a visual cue to be like, oh yes, these are your pronouns. But if that's not the case either, then like I said, it just really comes down to practice. It's practicing that, having conversations and using that person's pronouns if you're having a hard time remembering. And I will say, like, I think I'm pretty good and pretty fast at it, but that takes time. That didn't happen overnight. And so I think in our brains, especially if it's someone you've known for a long time, you have a bit of rewiring to do, and it's not a bad thing that takes time. And again, I think it's important to have those conversations of like, I'm trying, thanks for being patient, working on it. And when you make a mistake, every single time, like whack-a-mole, you have to correct yourself, because if you just let it go, then you'll let another one go, and you'll let another one go. And then you're like, oh, I have to work on this. And then you have to start over and it gets harder. So I think just being consistent with correcting yourself is a good one. Practice. And if there's opportunity for visual cues, then those are helpful too.
Perfect. Amazing. And the last question is, how do pronouns translate to other languages?
I only speak English, but it's a question I get all the time, especially like when we think about French that has like le and la and has like kind of gendered or feminine, masculine right in the language.
Exactly.
And so it's interesting to see like all the languages I've been asked about, or a couple of different languages I've seen, they've figured out their own kind of gender neutral ways in and around their own language. So again, I only speak English, but yeah, every language is different in how they operate and do that. And so they all have pronouns. And then as far as having kind of like the gender neutral pronoun can be a little bit more complicated in some of those languages. But yeah, folks are figuring it out. So I would say the answer is like, you'd have to ask the one who speaks that language. But
Okay.
yeah, it certainly does. It's different through, and English is such a complicated language as well, even on its own. So
Yes, it is. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much, Celeste. We really appreciate it.
Mhm.
And thank you so much, everyone, for joining our last session for the Back to School Live series. So the resources that were mentioned today in the presentations are linked in the comments section. And if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to Niagara Parents. We'll also be sharing Celeste's contact information if you would like to reach out to them.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you.